the Executive Director for the Park County Environmental Council. PCEC, we are your local grassroots environmental group here in Park County, working with people to protect the land, wild, water, and communities here in Yellowstone's Northern Gateway. As you all know, it's a pretty incredible place that we live in and that we have the great privilege of being stewards of. So today we're going to talk about Livingston's growth policy. We have been hosting community conversations. We started this up last winter, of course, in person, and we're going virtual this winter. These conversations are recorded, and we'll make sure to send them out as well in case you have anybody that you know that might have missed it. The purpose of the conversation is to create a space where we can come together and have a conversation about issues in Park County and work through what we see as important issues and how we can participate together. So one thing I want to say, we're talking about the Livingston Growth Policy today. We have a short presentation and a guest speaker, and then we're going to leave about 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. I would love if folks have questions as they come up to put them in the chat box, and I'll kind of facilitate going back through the chat box and inviting folks to ask their questions. And then I think everybody's pretty savvy now on the mute button, but don't forget to mute. And then I want to say that we are a nonprofit community organization. We're not the city. So the purpose today is to get ready for folks to testify at city meetings. So the Livingston Growth Policy is out for a draft. That means that this is kind of the first draft. We have an opportunity to make comments and make it better. But we need we need residents in the city and also residents in the county to show up to planning board meetings and make comments, testify, make suggestions about what you think, what the ways that we can make this document better. So we will, at the end of the meeting, we'll make sure and show when those upcoming dates are. We've sent them via email as well. So you can testify during meetings and also submit written comments. And I think that before I pass it over to our speakers, I want to just say that the issue at hand here is growth. You know, we live in an incredible gateway community, and we are seeing, as a result, more and more people moving to Southwest Montana, not just to Livingston, but to our surrounding communities. And how are we as a community going to handle that growth in a way that protects what we all love about this place we call home, the Yellowstone River, our public lands, open space, and our quality of life. And a growth policy, it lays the foundation of what the community wants our government to consider when they are planning for that growth. So this is really our opportunity to use our voices and help set a vision for how our community will grow. So with that, I am going to pass it to Jen Madgic to kick us off.
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is the second take, so to speak, on this particular conversation. We did this last night, and if you were on the call last night, we're switching it up a little bit today, so you won't be seeing the same thing. So the way I'm going to go through this is I've got about 12 slides. We have an individual, Randy Carpenter from FutureWest, on the line. And I'll give Randy an opportunity after I'm done. Randy, if you have comments, all of this is going to be quite familiar to you. Randy is also a planner, similar to myself. So first slide, let's see if I'm able to do this. Last night I had some. Okay, basic planning tools. So like Michelle said, this is our opportunity to determine Livingston's future. It's really kind of one of the only opportunities in a very comprehensive way to do that. So in Montana, it's called growth policy. It's called comprehensive plan in other places, but it's essentially the same thing. And tools that fall under that are the future land use map, neighborhood plans, subdivision regulations, zoning regulations, transportation plans, and things like capital improvement plans. I'm just afraid to press. Okay. So here is the future land use map that is currently in the draft Livingston Growth Policy. And if you look at it, the outer edge, there is a brown area, and that circles the entire town, and that's very low density residential. That goes out, I believe, a couple of miles on all directions. The yellow, there's two variations of yellow, a low density residential and a medium density residential. The purple is manufacturing. Red, kind of on the south part of 89, there's a community commercial and neighborhood commercial. And then of course we have green, which is parklands following the river. And I'm sorry, pink as well in a couple of spots is mixed use. So last summer, many of you may have participated in this survey. And this is one map that was sent out by the consultants working on the growth policy update. And the question asked in that survey through all of these areas, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and H off to the upper east corner there, is essentially, what is your vision for Livingston's future?
Right, and the other thing that also.
And what do you see as opportunities or constraints to development in these areas? So we all filled out surveys. Those comments went into a system to the consultants, and then the consultants in the draft came up with summaries for each of these areas. And those summaries are currently in the appendix of the growth policy draft. And one thing that we have said, so we were a little concerned when we first saw the future land use map that essentially doubles the size of Livingston, the footprint. So we wanted to kind of dig into some of the responses. And because everything was done online and we haven't had an overall community public meeting to talk about people's input, we were curious what that input was. So we asked the consultants for the 167 pages of input on all of these specific jurisdictions. And this next map shows an exercise that I did that is typically done in a community format. And, you know, we realized that COVID is kind of limiting the ability to do stuff like dot maps. And Randy, as a planner, planners, we've seen a lot of these dot maps. And the idea is everyone in the room gets a dot and you get to basically visually comment on how you feel about, in this case, development in these particular areas. So what I did, and there were 93 to 94 responses in those 167 pages, is I went through them one by one and then put a red dot in areas people thought development should not occur. I put a yellow dot in areas people had concerns about development. And I even wrote very in small letters, you can see kind of what their concerns were. And they ran the gamut from environmental concerns to topography, to sprawl, to lack of infrastructure and so forth. And then the blue represented basically people thinking that these were great spots for growth. And when you look at the map, kind of our first thought, and I think Michelle's the one that said this, is this really doesn't tell us anything. You know, people's opinions are all over the place. And how great it would be to all get in a room and talk about, you know, things like, what do you feel about development in C versus H, and, you know, be able to kind of have a community conversation about that. So that's kind of why we're here today and why we did this last night, and also why we're asking the city to devote one meeting, at least one meeting, to talk this out a little bit more. We really think that future land use map is critical. It's pretty important when you come up with a map, put it in your growth policy and say, this is where we want growth to go. There really needs to be a lot of community input as to how we've come up with those maps, because they're going to be used. So here is old Livingston, Montana, back from 1883, 137 years ago, back when Livingston was in Gallatin County. I thought that was kind of interesting. And it just shows kind of planning in the old days and potentially how sensible planning was. Basically because we didn't have cars and we protected things like the river, but almost indirectly because the river was a dangerous place to grow and people knew that there were floodplains and so forth. So you can see this nice cluster of how Livingston started. We've got the grid system. If you look closely, you see churches, you know, about 6 blocks apart, infrastructure built, and of course, the railroad being important. And then industrial areas kind of tucked to the side, so they didn't conflict with where people lived. So real sensible design back then. And you look at a lot of our towns throughout our country, and they've started like this. And it's kind of interesting looking at this next slide, that this idea of development cluster with a town center is coming back, and it's called traditional neighborhood design. And it's being looked at as a great way for new communities and new areas to develop. So one of our thoughts is in these new areas that Livingston is looking at growing, we should be really careful about the kind of growth that goes in there. And that, is there any opportunity either to tie in to current Livingston core, or if there are new areas, to come up with new neighborhoods and make sure that those neighborhoods have all of the things that the older neighborhoods have. So people can walk to things and, you know, conveniently be able to go to school, shop, walk, bike, whatever it is, go to church. So just thought that this is interesting, that this phenomenon of neighborhood design that goes back to 1883 is kind of coming back and being showcased as something that's great. So kind of the reverse of kind of compact design is something that we're all familiar with, called sprawl. This looks, you know, familiar to all of us. We've seen this. We see it in Livingston. We certainly see it in Bozeman and really across the country. And this is an article I just happened to pick up from the New York Times. It goes back 7 years. Is suburban sprawl on its way back? So sprawl has kind of come and gone in our society. And we've kind of recognized over the years that sprawl, to some degree, is wasteful. It impacts community health. It's very costly. If you look at the homes in this photo, if you don't currently own a home, the likelihood of this being your first home is probably unlikely. Yet this is what we're developing more than anything else. So large, mid to large size single family homes that's only available to a very small market. So what has happened with sprawl too is people have been left behind in the housing market. We're not building what they call it's called in planning terms, missing middle. We're not building the smaller homes that we used to in the past, because quite frankly, for some developers, it doesn't pencil out. And in some cases, we've created zoning regulations that allow this. And we haven't looked at our zoning regulations in a way to be creative and create something different. So real quickly, sprawl defined, it's real familiar, large scale real estate development, resulting in low density, scattered, discontinuous, car dependent construction, usually on the periphery of declining older suburbs and shrinking city centers. That sounds familiar. So another thing along with sprawl is something in the planning world we call leapfrog development. So the idea that you can have this development that leaps out from a town center. It's sprawl too, of course. And what can happen with leapfrog development is you can develop it in a compact way, and there might be some amenities there that serve the people who happen to live there. But for the most part, they're still having to hop on their car and get to other places like schools or, other services that might impact them that they need on a day-to-day basis. So this is leapfrog development, sprawl outside of Denver. Sprawl has been studied to death. It's not old. It is old, it's not new. And it's something that a wise community would look at and potentially try not to repeat. And so I just looked through a couple of books. We have a gal on the call, Barb Oldershaw today, who is a former student of Dolores Hayden, the field guide to sprawl. So she might have some comments as well, but she certainly, I think, understands what sprawl has done to our country. So some takeaways real quickly. I don't think I'm really going to go into these, but, learning from mistakes of the past, trying to avoid sprawl and leapfrog development. It's really important to maintain the infrastructure that we have and try to prioritize maintenance and upgrades over adding to infrastructure, because that just increases the burden. Building infrastructure that's sustainable, adaptable. There's something in Montana statute called neighborhood plans. It's really a good process. And once a community adopts a growth policy, a neighborhood plan is a way to kind of zero in on a particular area and make sure you're comprehensively looking at a particular spot. And then something I talked about earlier, new neighborhoods need to include all the things that the old neighborhoods include: parks, schools, small scale commercial, businesses, range of housing, not just single families, so everyone could potentially live in these newer areas. And so one big takeaway, and this is something we're interested in kind of diving into deeper in a subsequent call, a subsequent conversation, is infill and redevelopment. So if we don't do sprawl, but we promote new neighborhoods, which are extremely costly too, what are some other alternatives to making sure Livingston can grow and keep up with some of the demands for growth? And is there a way to do that in kind of cost-effective ways that takes advantage of existing infrastructure? And there are ways. So I love Google Maps, Google Earth. Here's Livingston, and for all of us, a very precious place, and places that are appropriate for growth, and certainly places that perhaps we want to try to protect. And lastly, I'm just going to mark your calendars. There's a couple of upcoming planning board meetings. The Livingston Planning Board is currently on a really tight time frame to try to review the growth policy. We're a little worried about that. We think more time perhaps is needed really to get it right, particularly when we're talking about growth over the next 10, 20 years. So if you can participate, mark these calendar dates down, and there's an opportunity to email comments. And I think what we're really looking at doing too is coming up with some solutions and writing down some language that we can offer as suggestions to put into the current draft. So we're going to be asking for your help and your support of new language to try to really make the current draft better. So with that, Michelle, kick it back to you. Actually, Randy, if you want to just say anything, it can be a couple of minutes, whatever you think. I can go back to old slides, whatever works for you.
Okay. Well, gee, I don't know, how much I have to add. I mean, Jen really captured it very well, I think. I have read through the draft growth policy, and I really do agree with Jennifer about, well, my concern really would be that that right there, that future land use map. There's no clear statements in the draft growth policy about prioritizing infill. I mean, there's really, in my opinion, not clear enough statements on really where do we want to grow. And for you folks out there, that's what I would focus on. I think those are the most important questions to be answered by this growth policy. And there's a lot of pages in this growth policy. I read a lot of them. And there are a lot of strategies or actions in there. I counted some 102 strategies in the first 2 years. And in the next 3 to 5 years, 113 different strategies that range from everything from, land use, but also things like, I just opened it up here on my computer, and there's a goal about, implementing computer aided dispatch system for police, fire, EMS, which I'm sure is very important. But in my opinion, the focus really, the primary focus, the first thing a growth policy should answer is, where is growth going to go? Are we going to grow outward, or are we going to first focus on those vacant lots that are developable within our existing community that already have the infrastructure ready there without having to build new infrastructure? And what does that growth look like? Jennifer put up the traditional or neo-traditional design sketch there. Are we going to encourage that? Are we going to really create the sort of ordinances that result in that sort of development? Or are we going to have more like what Jennifer put up, that sort of post-70s, large lot, pretty homogeneous neighborhood design that is totally auto-centric and segregates uses, residential over here, commercial way over here, and so you have to drive everywhere. I did some back of the envelope GIS analysis of of growth areas, potential growth areas in Livingston, and it looks to me like you would have, if the community said we're going to focus on infill first, that you would have plenty of land within the existing city limits of Livingston to accommodate 5 to 10 years worth of growth. That's very rough, but at the same time is quite conservative. Now that doesn't always work that way, because maybe a landowner that has 5 acres within Livingston says, I don't want to develop it. So it's always a mix of, some developing, sort of adjacent to the community, and a mix of infill development. But I do think the more infill development you can get, the much better off you are. And why do I say that? Well, a more compact community where we have slightly smaller lots, more walkable, and, we focus on infill rather than sprawling, moving outward, greatly enhances energy efficiency. We use a lot less energy, and that means our carbon footprint as a community is smaller, mainly because we drive less, but also because there, in that sort of community, there are more, what we call attached units. In other words, apartments or condos or townhomes that share walls has a huge impact on energy efficiency of homes. So if you want climate change strategy for Livingston, focus on infill, focus on compact neighborhoods. Compact neighborhoods save habitat. They save agricultural land and open space. Again, just because you're not, expanding outward into what we call, green fields, that is undeveloped areas outside of the community. Compact development saves taxpayer dollars because we don't have to extend that infrastructure farther out, and there is less infrastructure per house to maintain, to build and maintain. So if you have 3 homes on a block, large lots, well, you've still got to plow that. But what if you got 6 homes on that block? 6 homes are now sharing the cost of that rather than 3. So then that has an impact on affordability of the communities. Smaller lots, smaller homes, and less infrastructure costs means more affordability. And I should say that, this doesn't mean we have to go, to a dense urban area. But it means getting back to the more traditional neighborhood design that have more homes in a given area that Jennifer showed. Building more compact creates more transportation choices. People now have the option whether they want to drive, but they can bike and they can walk. It also that impacts affordability, because transportation costs are a huge component of household costs for housing, because transportation and housing are totally linked. And then finally, more compact communities have, and we have the data to show it, result in much better public health outcomes because people are getting out and walking more and riding their bike more. Overall, that makes a huge impact on things like obesity and diabetes and heart disease. The data is pretty clear on that. So, to me, the focus, there's a lot of things in the growth policy, but to me, the first focus should be on where do we grow and what sort of neighborhoods are we going to develop for all the reasons I just gave.
Thanks, Randy. I have one follow-up to that excellent summary. You mentioned, having gone through the growth policy and all the objectives, and there are quite a few. And as you go through, there's a couple of things that sound really good. The draft talks about smart growth, it talks about compact growth, it talks about involving PCEC and identifying environmentally sensitive areas. But there's a catch to that. And that catch is the growth policy is not a regulatory document. So you need to supplement the growth policy with regulatory tools to add teeth. And that is a hard process. It can be done, absolutely, but it means really good, strong subdivision regulations, design standards, zoning regulations, good transportation plans. So planning is complicated. And just because you add something to the growth policy, which I'm saying, super important, doesn't mean you're done. So I just want to kind of flag that. And then I'll also say compact development, it's, I don't think I'll go into this right now. Let's shoot it to Michelle and let's get some other people participating here. I could talk all day.
Thank you, Randy and Jen. Thank you both for that excellent presentation. I'll just say, like, a quick, big picture is that the growth maps as developed and in our current growth policy right now really set forth a vision and permissive vision for growth in every direction. And it's a lot of single family, low density development all around the edges of town, including a huge footprint out into the county. And so that's what we're really concerned about, and what we need your help to, to show up at these upcoming meetings and testify and say, like, our vision for our community is not that type of development. It's not sprawl. We want to grow. We want to grow from the in out. We want to protect our downtown. Some great examples of that we can highlight in our community right now are the redevelopment of the hospital downtown, also the park clinic. So I just want to say there are examples of places where we're already doing that. I believe there are lots of opportunities in our downtown core right now for new development. So I think that those points are really important for you all to write in comments and to show up at these meetings. And don't forget to sign our petition. Many of you have. I'll say we already have, I think, close to 150 signatures from community members saying, hey, we want to have one meeting dedicated to this future growth map, because it really is the heart of how we grow, and it deserves a lot more attention. So we're hoping that the city will grant that request, and that we'll have a really great opportunity to invite everybody to testify and get your comments and your voices included in this future plan. So with that, I'm going to look to the chat and go up here and see John Heike. Can you go ahead and unmute and ask your question? Thanks for joining us.
My question was in looking at the purple here on this map, I see a lot of areas that may be annexed from the county. I'm not positive about that, but there is an inherent question and comment in that, and the importance of coordinating things between the city and the county, because the impact of annexation of land from the county to the city has a negative fiscal impact on the county, at least on face value. So I just want to make note of that. And my understanding is that there has not been as much coordination between the city and the county as could be possible. And Jen Madgic is nodding, I think. So there's some opportunities here.
That's great. And thanks so much for bringing that up, John. That's actually a requirement per state statute. When you put together growth policy, that cities and counties coordinate, they come up with an interlocal agreement, and you can always improve upon that interlocal agreement. And if you don't have a good, strong interlocal agreement understanding between those two jurisdictions, you literally can wind up with a mess. And we have great examples of those messes in Bozeman. If you ever come and look outside of city limits, like the Four Corners area, kind of the spillover effect if we don't have good planning within the county and good planning within the city. So thanks for bringing that up.
And I would just add, we do have a joint, or we have had in the past, a joint city-county board, which has not been convening. So I think, John, you're bringing a really important point. This is something that we should be commenting about in these upcoming planning board meetings, and asking about what type of coordination has happened to date with the county, if any. I'm not sure that much has happened. I'd love to hear, John, if you know of the current status of that joint city-county planning board, or does the county have somebody sitting on a city board?
We've had people that were appointed, but the board has not, the joint board has not been active. The county planning board, the Park County Planning Board just got a request from the city manager for a member of our planning board to join, get the joint situation back moving again. So that's hopeful. That's hopeful, but the board, the county board has been has a strong desire to have it more active than it has been over the past several years. So it's hopeful now.
Awesome. Thank you. I like hearing hopeful things. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question here. Kelly Beavers. And Kelly, you have quite a long question here. Do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, and I can just shorten it. I just wasn't sure if I was gonna. My question is really about tools. And so it's twofold. It's one, asking what tools might the city or county be talking about to both incentivize infill development, since typically those land values are quite a bit higher, in part because they do have that connection to the infrastructure, as y'all mentioned. So just wondering obviously we're not the first community to have this problem. So what tools maybe have been brought up? I didn't see many in the growth plan really called out. And the same question about tools for things like conservation-based zoning, when we think about different tools in our zoning to allow for clarity around concentrating development when we are outside of the core. Just wanted to know if anyone was aware of meaningful conversations about innovative tools, or if we're just trying to use the same old tools.
That's really good points. And there are ways to incentivize development wherever you want development to occur. So the city could actively incentivize development out on the outskirts of town by doing a variety of things. Paying for infrastructure, having the community pay for infrastructure, similar to the recent effort to put a bond for a new rail crossing out before the voters. So having the public pay for that infrastructure, is going to facilitate development out in that area. In the reverse, you can incentivize development in the core by doing things like eliminating impact fees. Or reducing impact fees, so the cost of hookup into city services is less. Inherently, it's somewhat cheaper to develop in town because you are taking advantage of an existing street system, existing water pipes, sewer pipes. So it should be cheaper. It makes sense to grow in town, so that's a huge incentive. The city could take an active role in coming up with different regulations, different standards, accelerated review times. There can grants, they can apply for state and federal grants that help redevelopment in the downtown area. And because the downtown area is a historic district, there's lots of opportunity there. So real short answer to how you can incentivize development a variety of different ways.
And
if I could real quickly add to that by using tax increment financing, something you can call it urban renewal areas, where we look at, I don't know if anybody's been on North 7th Avenue in Bozeman lately, but all the redevelopment that's occurring along there is due to the fact that the city established what's called tax increment financing. And really what it does is it takes taxpayer dollars from that area, from within that area, and uses it for infrastructure and things like street lighting and landscaping and more flexible rules around development. So what you see happening on North 7th Street is directly it's all about the incentives that the city of Bozeman is using to encourage development there.
Real good point. I think Bozeman has 5 URA districts, and Livingston, I think, has 1. You've got the one in the downtown area. So really good tool. I'm glad Randy mentioned that.
So I just to kind of think about the process. So right now, So we know that, I mean, that's something we want to encourage, infill development. And so, Jen, do you think that the current growth policy, does it do, what do we need to do? Is this something we need to be showing up at those planning board meetings and saying, hey, we know there are innovative tools. We don't think the growth policy is contemplating them. And then, or do those innovative tools kind of stem from the growth policy? So it's the important thing for us to hammer home right now is we really want infill development, please incentivize it. And then the tools come as the next step. And then one other point before I pass it back to you on like how we accomplish this in our comments to get it in this growth policy here and actually in policy. There is one available open seat right now on Livingston's URA. So if anybody here is passionate about urban redevelopment, I would encourage you to consider applying for that vacant seat on Livingston's URA. And I can put that in the chat box.
So one thing I want to just state is here is the, back to the dot map. Here are the comments that have been generated so far regarding how Livingston should grow. And it's really up to the community, once again, to determine that. And we think it's really important for the community to have a public conversation, not, what we're doing here, but a government, the planning department, the planning board, city commission needs to have these conversations and generate, kind of be able to kind of hear what all these people in these areas have to say, because how Livingston grows needs to be Livingston's vision, not me, Jennifer from California, from Bozeman. That's not going to go over well, or Randy from Iowa. It needs to be Livingston. So first and foremost, you guys need to go to the meetings and speak as to how it's, what you think is important for future growth. And if you agree with us that infill is better, then let's find ways to write that in and make it a priority. So the growth policy is very clear that we want to prioritize this kind of growth over that kind of growth. And we can find ways to strengthen that within the growth policy and then make sure those regulatory tools follow.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, I'm going back to the chat box here, and Jesse Wilcox, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Guys for doing this today. I really appreciate this. I almost feel like we had like 4 hours to go through this, but I know we only have a few more minutes. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask maybe one other question other than what I put in the box, but what I was noticing about this growth policy is that there weren't a lot of specifics around, like Jennifer, you were just mentioning a bunch of different tools or incentives. And Michelle, I think you were asking this, but as far as comments to the planning board, I know they're really looking at specific language to be added or included or omitted. So really specific comments on each section on what you would like to see there, what you recommend being there. And so I think that just would be very helpful for the planning board moving forward in putting recommendations to the commission when it comes to the growth policy. So I really appreciate just hearing some of these incentives that were just mentioned, because none of those are in there. And I do also agree that there does not seem to be much language at all about focusing on infill or what infill would look like. And that just kind of leads into the question I put in the chat about these impervious areas that are listed on page 18 in the land use section. It almost looks as if it's discouraging infill. And so I just was curious if that's how you read that as well. And if that's exactly what that means.
I'll have to take a look at that, Jesse. I've got my copy here.
And I just looked at it, Jen, and I would agree that, I mean, I wish that statement would have pointed out that over the community scale or watershed scale or whatever, more compact development results in less impervious surfaces. Yeah, your downtown is mostly impervious surfaces, right? But you're just getting a lot more activity in that small area. If you spread all of that development out at low density, that's actually results in an increase in impervious areas. And I wish they would have pointed that out in that section.
And good comment to Jesse about very specific language, and that is our plan. I am just wrapped up 2.5 years of working on the Bozeman Growth Policy, and that's how we got the most done, when there was very specific language that was suggested and then voted upon by the planning board. So we're working on that specific language.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I would say that we're at Park County Environmental Council. We're working on our comments. I know there are other kind of experts working on comments. Randy, I think maybe you guys over at FutureWest are. So our goal will be to get our comments out early enough so that and share them with you all so that you can look over them and see if there are things there that you want to reiterate in your own comments. And then I'm going to go back to the chat here, and I see Leslie, you want to go ahead? You've got some comments about section E.
Yay. Hi, everybody. Yes, so, once I saw, if you go back to the other map, the one you just had there, the one right before this, there you go, that one there. When I saw this and shared it with a few of the people, that's a very big old community out there. My house is actually from 1935, and I have property and horses and whatnot. And most of the people out there in the 5-acre area, which is highlighted in yellow there, these folks, like we talked about earlier, these folks, they don't pay attention to what goes on in the city. City folks don't really pay attention too much what's going on in the county. I had a talk with Steve Caldwell the other day, and I told him our concern about this future land use map. And he said to me that the city could gobble up and annex any kind of land that they see fit, and there's nothing the county can do about it. The people are the only one that can do something about it. That was the answer. And this is extremely concerning to me. We've been all sharing documents in our community, trying to get the word out to be on the call on the 18th. So that you're going to get more opinions and more people signing up on the thing you're what is it? Putting their names on the
petition.
Thank you, the petition.
Yeah.
It's been a long day, trust me. So it's I'm just really confused about what they see as a potential for the growth in this area. It's Billman Lane has the one pump. We all have wells. There's a map that's in this complete package that has all the dots from wells and septic over many years of how many, have applied. And it looks like it's dense, but basically it's not as dense as it looks. So there are some places out there that have manufactured housing that are more closer to the Billman Creek. But, other than that, I'm just really confused that there's not a way to communicate that if the city has a direction for this future land use map, that this is the direction they're going. How are they not reaching out to the county folks? The county folks, if you live in the county, you don't care what's going on in the city because it doesn't affect you. And it's kind of vice versa. So there's got to be this way to kind of combine this information. The more folks that I've been talking to, they're confused. They're like, well, we never pay attention. So, you know, you're going to see a lot of this happen. It's folks at the last minute jumping on a call or you know, jumping on and writing an email because they just happen to catch word by a conversation.
Yeah.
There's got to be a way that within this future land use map, all of these folks should be getting some sort of information. And how do you do that?
That's really good point there, Leslie, because as we look at this map, all of the colored areas are currently the county. And that's where the city is expecting to grow. So this is not just a city process, it's a Park County process.
Absolutely.
So I'm happy to give you a call afterwards, Leslie, and kind of talk about this a little bit more and help clear up some misconceptions and so forth. So I'll plan to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And so we've got 5 more minutes and a couple questions. So I'm going to ask if I want to get to Felix and to Peter Brown. So Felix, I see you've, it's more of a comment than it is a question. Do you want to go ahead and unmute and maybe just take a minute or two so we can get to a couple more?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the important things is that the tax code incentivizes land development correctly. And that should, in all honesty, just reflect the costs associated with servicing certain properties. So like, I don't want to tell people what to do, but if there is an empty lot in downtown Livingston, it's essentially already consuming the same services as a lot right next to it with a house on it. And it should pay for those services to the same level as the house that's there next door. Because that overall, I think, keeps the taxes the lowest for everyone and encourages development in a good way and keeps services functioning and keeps them as low cost as possible for everyone. And one of my questions about that is if the development plan has any tax code levers in terms of property taxes or not.
I could address that real quickly. You know, Felix, you hit on something that has been a sore spot with a lot of people for a very long time. We, in the United States, we tax land very low and we tax buildings high. So your property taxes will remain low if you keep your land vacant and you speculate on it. And the minute you develop it, the property taxes go way up. And it should be the other way around. Unfortunately, that's a state thing that, you know, the city can't do anything about at this time. But would, you know, I was mentioning earlier, the tax increment financing, that is a mechanism that we can get at, you know, using our fiscal policy to incentivize growth.
Great. Thank you for your comments, Felix. And then I also see Daniela, thank you for your comments. I'm going to go ahead and see if we have time for one more question here from Peter Brown about the railroad. And then want to just thank everybody for all the really excellent engagement and encourage us to make sure that we're communicating via email and participating in the upcoming meetings. So Peter, you want to go ahead and ask your question, and we'll flash up the upcoming meetings there, and we'll make sure and send an email to everyone as well. If anybody has to jump here right at one. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, just wanted to bring up the point, like, has the railroad been involved in this conversation, and do they see themselves as part of the solution around some of the infill that might be needed to produce the number of lots and housing units that Livingston predicts it'll need in the next, let's say, 20 years? It seems like there's quite a bit of space there, but I just don't know the history of that land and if they would be a partner in that redevelopment.
There is mention, and I've got to look at it more closely, of redevelopment of some brownfields in the railroad areas. So I think the growth policy mentions that. I don't know how strong that partnership is and commitment from the railroad. And Randy, I don't know if you've looked at that. more?
I haven't, but you know, if I'm a developer who does this sort of thing, and there are thousands of them in the country and some of them in Montana, think of the Great Northern site in Helena, which was exactly, I mean, went in there, cleaned it up, used tax dollars to do it within the area, and they got a great development there. So many developers would just be licking their chops by looking at the Livingston market and then that particular land there and what cool things you could do. So I hope something moves forward there.
And similarly, Bozeman is in the process of forming a new urban renewal district in the old Idaho pole site, which is near the railroad, which is contaminated, and it's an old Superfund site. And once again, using tax dollars to help make those improvements. And we'll see where it goes. There's a lot of controversy over it, but good idea if it works.
Yeah, the United States EPA has a whole big brownfields program that will pay using federal dollars to come in and do the cleanup and help put in infrastructure. So it makes it, you know, fairly attractive for a developer who knows what they're doing in an area like that.
Well, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Jen, for your excellent presentations. I want to thank the community for what is a really great conversation. I hate to wrap it up. Before we do, I want to just acknowledge and thank that we had quite a few City of Livingston board members. Marshall Swearingen is on the tree board, Sarah Stands on Parks and Trail, Bob Ebinger, who's on the Urban Renewal Association, Jesse Wilcox on the planning board, Jack Luther, John Heidke, and Laura Burks. John and Laura are from the county planning board. So that's just really encouraging to see so many active citizens participating in those boards and showing up today. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. And don't forget to mark your calendars for these upcoming meetings. And you don't have to speak at the meetings. You can also write submit your comments in writing. We learned at the first city meeting that they actually read written comments onto the record, which was really nice. So feel free to email your comments to planning@livingstonmontana.org. And please reach out to any of us if you have questions. With that, my clock, my baby bell rang, so I have to jump to some other duties. And I'm just really grateful for you all being here. Look forward to doing this again soon.
Yes, thanks everyone. The hope is to continue this discussion outside of the meetings as well. So stay tuned. Thanks, Randy.
Welcome.
Really helpful.